Turn to Dr. Jim Walsh, who's a senior research associate at MIT's Security Studies program. Mr. Walsh, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Thank you very much. Well, North Korea, we know, has openly talked about preemptive strikes. What do you think the pressure points are that the U.S. can use on North Korea?
Well, I don't think we have, we've had this problem for a long time. And so we've tried pretty much everything that we have. Sometimes we've had a little success, much of the time not. The Trump administration actually completed its policy review for North Korea and has adopted a policy of enhanced pressure, which means sanctions, and maybe some engagement at the end. But let me put this in context, Rena, because I went to bed last night thinking I'd be woken up by phone calls announcing a North Korean nuclear test. And that didn't happen. I woke up a happy man. So we didn't have a nuclear test, and we didn't even have a missile test. We can talk about what was that in that parade, but I think we should pause for a moment and appreciate that things could be much worse as we were speaking today, and that's a good thing.
Do you think the fact that nothing was launched so far today a sign that he's able to show that he can respond without having to use force all the time?
Well, I think you've put your finger on what is probably the central question going forward, which is what are the lessons all these leaders, the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Americans, going to draw? Will they draw the right lesson? Sometimes you have a good thing happen, but you interpret it and draw the wrong lesson that gets you in trouble down the line. But if you get the right lesson, then it's an opportunity for progress. So Mr. Trump may think that the North Koreans didn't test because of that carrier group. I have real doubts about that proposition, but he might conclude that, and therefore he might be encouraged to sort of wave warships and guns around more, and then that could lead to a problem. He might interpret it as meaning the Chinese threat to cut off North Korean oil, that seemed to work pretty well, and maybe we should continue to work with China on this, and he may see it as an opportunity to sort of turn the page. Maybe the North Koreans are ready to turn the page, but it will all depend on what lessons they draw from North Korea not having a nuclear test. I just hope everyone's able to draw the right one.
And Jim, you mentioned the past week the White House has conducted a review of their North Korea policy. Is there any way to gauge how different it is from the Obama administration?
You know, it's pretty much the same thing. Mr. Obama had which I was critical of, had a policy of what's called strategic patience. And it was, support your ally, lots of sanctions, don't talk to the North Koreans. And that played out for a really long time and it really didn't get us anywhere. The Trump policy review also endorses sanctions, but tries to double down on sanctions. And I've interviewed my colleagues and I have interviewed North Korean defectors and studied sanctions, and just adding more isn't really getting at the problem. You have to sort of respond to their counter moves. That's the way you get at them. But by itself, it's not going to solve anything. Yes, we're going to support our South Korean ally. I think that's a good thing. Then the question is, if all options are on the table, does that include talking to the North Koreans? Does it include diplomacy? Now, if it doesn't, then all options are not on the table. And this last weekend, I think, suggests why it's important to communicate with the North Koreans. Hold your friends close and your enemies closer so that you avoid a miscalculation or a misperception. So I'm hoping that they will. That was included in the policy review. I was happy to see that. We'll see whether it gets any priority or not.
And Jim, this quote kind of struck me. It comes from a top North Korean official who said, "We will respond to an all-out war with an all-out war and a nuclear war, nuclear-style attack." Do you believe that they will launch a nuclear attack? Do you think that's possible?
I think there are two sides to this, Rena. Deliberately? No, because they're not suicidal, and they know that they would lose that war. And the main thing that the Kim family, and Chairman Kim in particular, want to do is to hold on to power. Like all tyrants, they want to hold on to power and not give it up. So I don't think they're going to, come after us. And a lot of that talk is just, threats that don't really mean anything. Can we have a war, though? Yes, and that is if the leaders make a mistake and miscalculate, and some small incident begins to escalate because everyone's sort of leaning into the conflict. And that is a real possibility. Part of the irony here is that the U.S. and South Korean forces are so strong that they can take out every military asset, almost every military asset, except the artillery near the border, take them out. And if you're Kim and you're sitting in Pyongyang, you're suddenly saying to yourself, oh, my God, if I don't pull the trigger early in some conflict, I'm going to lose what I have. I've got to use them or lose them. That's an unstable situation. So deliberate war, no. Accidental war, maybe.
Former CIA Deputy Director Mike Morell was here on CBSN, and he said that by sending Navy ships towards the Korean Peninsula, that the U.S. is feeding Kim Jong-un's paranoia because he believes the U.S. is out to get him. I want to play you actually a bit of sound and get your reaction on the other side of this bite.
He started this crisis with a series of provocations after the president came to office that was designed for a specific diplomatic purpose of getting us to the negotiating table. So we'll give him something for his bad behavior. That's what the Clinton administrations did. That's what the Bush administration did. The Obama administration stopped that.
They ignored him.
They ignored him, essentially. He wants to get back to the Clinton and Bush years where he does something bad, we come running to the negotiating table and we give him something, right? We buy something from him. He wants to get back to that. That's why he started this crisis. We're feeding the crisis with our bluster and by sending aircraft carriers into the area. We're feeding that. The best thing we could do is, as you said, ignore him. Maybe tighten sanctions a little bit every time he does something bad.
That was Mike Morell with my colleague Vlad Duthiers. Do you agree with him?
I agree with his conclusion, but not his premise. What do I mean by that? I agree that sort of this brandishing weapons is bad, not for the reason he cites, although I think it could help them, but not really what he means. I think when you do that, if someone calls your bluff, then you look weak, and then you're confronted with, okay, well, what am I going to do next? And so I worry that, like many of my colleagues, worried that the North Koreans were going to test. We weren't going to respond militarily for all sorts of reasons. That policy review essentially said there's no good military option. It's because not only do they have nuclear weapons, they have all this artillery pointed at Seoul. So we weren't going to hit him if he did something. Then how would we look? That's why I think sort of pulling back and not getting overly excited about every little thing that happens is probably good advice. But I disagree with the premise. He said this is all about North Korea bargaining to get goodies from us. And I don't think that's true. The one time we were able to stop North Korea's nuclear program and their long-range missile tests was during the agreed framework. Now, that lasted about 8 years. I would love to freeze North Korea's nuclear program for 8 years right now. I would love to freeze their missile program right now rather than it getting better and better every year. They had 26 missile tests last year. So I think diplomacy is important. If the North Koreans are willing to bargain, then I think we should bargain with them. That's certainly better than war or collapse or, catastrophe.
And we know that Vice President Mike Pence left today for Asia to meet with the allies there about how to address the nuclear threat. What do you think the U.S. allies want to hear from him in this region?
Well, I think they probably want to hear, don't go off on your own. We're partners. We're treaty allies. And oh, by the way, if a war breaks out, it's happening in our yard, not yours. So please don't go off and do things without including us as part of the conversation. Yes, we want your support, but we need to be deciding this together. We're stronger if we're all on the same team. And so why don't you wait until South Korea has its presidential election in early May before we go off doing anything crazy here? I think that's probably one message, maybe not quite the same words that I'm using, but they're going to say, thank you for your support, but let's consult each other going forward.
That was going to be my last question for you, Jim. How do you think the fact that there's no president right now in South Korea, how does that affect maybe how the White House chooses to move forward? Does it even affect it at all?
Well, I would hope so. I mean, my gosh, I don't think we should go charging off, shooting from the hip and doing something when the country that actually is going to have to fight the war is sitting right there across from the DMZ, and might be a victim. Plus, by the way, we have more than 20,000 U.S. troops in South Korea. We have tens of thousands more in Japan. So I think and again, what the North Koreans like to do is they like to divide us. They like to divide South Korea from Japan and the U.S. from South Korea because it improves their bargaining position or their relative strength. I think we need to be on the same page, and that means not making this a U.S. This isn't USA, North Korea. This is us and our regional allies together, and if we stay together, we're more likely to be effective.
Dr. Jim Walsh talking about an issue that he's very passionate about. We love that. Thanks for your time, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you.